Loved ones, today is session 10. If we were face-to-face, it would be 3 July 2020, and this would be day 5 of week 2. So when we complete this session together, we will have done 2 of the 4.5 weeks of the summer session. Hallelujah. So I have no admin stuff to share with you today. There's nothing due today. And I'm just going to roll into the material that's in chapter 7. Chapter 7 is a discussion of decision making. And it's pretty important stuff. A lot of broad topics and pretty important stuff. So I want to do something, excuse me, before I talk about the material in the chapter, because there's a decision making technique that you could also argue is an action technique, which is profoundly important, and it's not discussed in the chapter. And I certainly don't criticize anyone for that, but I want to talk to you about it. So before we get into the actual material in chapter 7, I want to talk to you about adaptation. I want to talk to you about adaptation because I do not have the power to give you any gifts. If I did, I would. But I think probably one of the most powerful gifts that I could give you, if I were empowered to do that, would be the ability to adapt. Every one of us has plans. Right now it's 5:20 on a Tuesday afternoon. I have plans for tonight, don't I? And tomorrow. Tomorrow my daughter is giving me a part of my Father's Day present, and it's a half a day with her. Time with my precious baby, I love it. So we all have plans, but I could walk through that door and my plans could change, couldn't they? What if I have a family member that's hurt in an accident? What if my truck won't start? What if Macy and I have an outdoor event planned tomorrow and it rains like a son of a gun? We all have plans. We have plans for the next hour, the next day, the next year. But oftentimes, our plans change because we have absolutely no control over the environment, do we? So we have to cultivate this ability to adapt. And the reason I think it has such primacy is so much change is forced on us. We don't make deliberate decisions. Change is forced on us. And the people that tend to thrive, the people that tend to flourish, the people that tend to succeed are the people who can adapt. They don't think, oh my gosh, I was going to go do this and now I can't. So let me tell you about adaptation, because again, we're talking about decision making, and I would argue that adaptation is an action sequence. But to get there, to take the actions, you have to engage in some decision making. So I want to share with you what I think the literature broadly talks about when it tackles the subject of adaptation. So here's the first thing we do. The very first thing we do is some form of assessment. Okay, so we're in a situation and we think, oh my goodness, what precisely is going on? Do I have an opportunity that I need to capitalize on? Is there a problem I need to solve? What's the task? What's the challenge in front of me? So we have to start this process of adaptation by making an assessment. What challenge is in front of me? I didn't plan on it, but I now have to deal with it. So the second step in this process is we literally have to take a quick look at the resource set. Am I alone? Do I have to solve this problem with no assistance? Can I make a phone call? Can people come and help me? Do I need material? Do I need more ammunition? Do I need a tow truck? What resources do I have? What resources do I need? So you have to look at the resource set. What's available to me, because I have some window, some time frame in which I must act. The next thing you do is you quickly but thoughtfully develop a set of responses. Here is one thing that I can do. Here's a second one. Here's a third. So you're simply looking at probable responses to whatever this challenge is. And then, unsurprisingly, you select the one that's best and you implement it. So I'm just going to write optimal. You choose the optimal one, the one that you think is best, and then you implement it. So, as simple as that appears to be on a whiteboard, that is the process of adaptation. And it's a skill I want you to cultivate. It will serve you well in life. It has no impact on me, no impact on this class. but it's a skill set. The Jews in Hebrew, oh gosh, I can't remember this. I hate it. In Hebrew, there's a word for wisdom. And again, I can't remember the word and I'm unprepared. And when you translate this Hebrew word into English, wisdom means skill for living. How cool is that? We always have plans. We know what we're going to do tonight, tomorrow, whenever. But our plans change because we have no control over the environment. How many people do you know missed their graduation in May? I know hundreds. I know a half a dozen or more people that had May weddings planned. Okay, that ain't happening because of coronavirus limitations on gatherings. I know people that plan to go to work and the businesses that employed them closed. Oh dear. We have to cultivate the skill, adaptation. So it starts with assessment. What challenge is in front of me? The second thing is you look at resource sets. What do I have? What do I need? The third thing, you develop a set of probable responses. What do I think might be a competent response to this? And then the last step is you choose the one that you believe is best and you act on it, you implement it. And sometimes this happens in minutes and other times you have days and weeks. Adaptation, our whole spring semester. Those of you that were here in the spring, many of us were face-to-face. I had 4 classes, about 200 students. And over the spring break, on Thursday of spring break, the Board of Regents said, everything USG is going to be online for the rest of the semester. Faculty, you have 1 week. And I'm not complaining. I'm a pretty happy guy. Love what I do. I had 1 week to convert, to transform 4 face-to-face classes to online. Never taught online before. If you remember my rules of engagement video, I told you that I'm in year 28. And I have purposely avoided teaching online because I don't like it. I don't think learning takes place. But did I have to adapt? I did. And when I talked to you about resource sets and set of responses and implementations, again, I would take you back to the rules of engagement video. I considered 4 platforms in 5 minutes, and that's when I decided to open a YouTube channel. I considered WebEx, boom. Zoom and Google Hangouts didn't work because it required interaction. YouTube, for me, and for you, I hope, was an ideal solution. It's accessible anywhere, any device, anytime, it's reliable. When you can get in, you get in. So, my point is that this same adaptation, it's what every one of us did in the spring. Every one of us. We didn't plan on the coronavirus and the fact that governors and people in state government would shut everything down. None of us planned on that. So we've been through adaptation recently. That is the process of adaptation. I would argue that adaptation is an action sequence. Yes, we have some pieces of decision making. What's the challenge? What are the resources? What are the choices? But we have to act. We have to implement the one that we think is best. So I would argue that assessment is in part decision making, but in reality, it's an action sequence. And that's why I wanted to present it here. It's not on the text, but I think it's enormously valuable. Again, if I had the power, if I did, I would gift it to you, this ability to adapt, because it will probably predict success in your life. Big stuff. So now we talk chapter 7. I want to point something out that won't surprise you. I've got about 25 classes that I will present across 2 different subjects. I'm teaching the principles class and I'm teaching a fundamentals of entrepreneurship class. So in 4.5 weeks, I have to come up with 50 different off-topic stories so that I can come up with these attendance verification questions. Y'all, it's wearing me out. I'm been moderately successful so far, but I'm going to have to start to dig really deep. So I ran out of fertile thinking earlier today as I was prepping for this class, and I looked in my office and I thought, got it. So I'm going to show you a framed photograph. I'm going to get close to the camera to do it. Here's the backstory. For 7 years, I raced GT cars on road courses. I raced in a series called SARC, it's South Atlantic Road Racing Championships. It's sanctioned by the Sports Car Club of America. I raced 2 different Mustangs. I raced an 01 Cobra for 1 year and then a 95 Cobra for the last 6. So one of the places I used to race since this road courses was VIR, Virginia International Raceway. magnificent track. I love it, I do. But one of the things VIR does is for trophies, it gives framed photographs of your race car on track. So that is a picture, that blue over white 95 Cobra is my race car, and yes, I beat the stuffing out of that C2 Corvette behind me. And that's very satisfying, because I'm running a 347, a pushrod V8. He was running a big block, a 427, and I beat him both days. So this is a trophy because I won my class at a race at VIR. And I just had to share that with you because I am really struggling to come up with fun stuff to say that's off topic, so I can do these attendance verification questions. So now I'm in chapter 7 as the authors presented. I'm on page 241, and they talk about 2 types of decision making, and they're radically different. But every decision that you and I ever make is going to be one of these 2. We either make decisions in analysis. We have the opportunity to gather information, process it, analyze it, interpret it, and decide. Oftentimes, we have that opportunity. However, many times, decisions we make are judgmental. We have to make a decision in real time. If you were considering a new cell phone plan, what you might do, because you've been making a decision in analysis, is you might gather data from 3 or 4 carriers, whomever you think might be good. Verizon, Sprint, don't know, don't care. So you gather information from 3 or 4 carriers about plans and prices and those related things, and you compare them. That's your analysis. And then you interpret them and you say to yourself, gosh, I think Verizon is hands down the best deal, or I think T-Mobile is hands down the best deal. But my point is, you're making a decision in analysis. You gather data, you analyze the data, you interpret the data, and then you make a decision. But your decision is informed by analysis. If you think about judgmental decisions, let me bring you to Statesboro, if I may. Let's pretend that you're in your car, you're driving, and you're on Fair Road, and you're approaching the Wendy's on Fair Road. So, as you approach Wendy's on Fair Road, the light goes from green to yellow. So, you are going to make a decision that is judgmental. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to say to yourself, what is the distance from me to the light, and what is my closure rate? And if you decide that you should stop, you're going to move from accelerator to brake, aren't you? If you're right under the light, you might say, I'm just going to roll through. So my point is, you're making a decision in real time. There's no analysis of data. You're exercising judgment because you've seen those patterns before. Proximity to the stoplight and the closure rate at which you're traveling. So, the rational process of decision making, this analytic one, is strikingly similar to the first part of adaptation. You identify the challenge or the task. You develop a set of possible solutions. I'm on 242. You evaluate and select the best one, and then you implement. What the rational model doesn't contemplate, and I think it should, is you looking at your resource set. What resources are available to me? When I talked about adaptation, that was the second thing you did. Do I have to solve this problem alone? Can I go home and get tools? Can I have friends help me? Do I need to look at colleagues or coworkers to help solve this problem or take advantage of this opportunity? So the rational process is similar, certainly, to adaptation, but the rational process suggests that you have a timeline because your decision is going to be made analytically. Identify the task, and then you gather data, don't you? And you develop a set of solutions, and then you choose one. Now, what that assumes, if we are rational decision makers, that assumes that our information is both complete and accurate. What if the information I have about a particular task is incomplete? Or what if it's inaccurate? Does that suggest that my decision will be flawed? That also assumes that I'm going to approach this logically, because this is the rational decision making. There are a lot of people, a lot of decisions that are made that are emotive. What if I decided to buy a new car? I'm not going to do it because I buy trucks, unless it's a performance car, that's different. But what if I were going to buy a new car and I said to you, it's got to be bright blue? Is that rational? No, it's a personal preference, isn't it? That's an emotive decision. So some decisions are made rationally. We simply look analytically at the data and we think this decision is clearly the best one. Other decisions are emotive. They're driven by emotions, and that isn't bad. But the point is, the rational decision-making model sort of bakes into it that we're going to be logical, rational decision makers, that we're not going to be persuaded to respond emotionally. And that oftentimes is not the case. So there's an adaptation of the rational model of decision making. I'm on 244 right now. Gosh, it's been in the literature since the late 70s maybe, or maybe even the early 60s. I recall studying this when I was in grad school, and that was right after the Earth's crust cooled. Remember that? Bronco the dinosaur. This adaptation of the rational model is called bounded rationality. And what it suggests is that as decision makers, we satisfy. We often choose the first best option. We don't look at everything, but we look at one, we say, gosh, that works. I'm going to implement that. What if I wanted to go buy a Dodge pickup truck and I got out of Jimmy Britt on Highway 301 South, and he's got one that sort of meets my criteria, and I shake hands and say, deal. Here's a down payment check. Have it ready tomorrow, I'll pick it up. Okay? Did I go online and check any other inventories? Did I drive to Savannah, to Augusta, anywhere else that has a Dodge dealership? Did I go see Woody Folsom in Baxley or Vidalia? He sells Dodge trucks. You see my point? I found something that sort of met my criteria and I acted on it. That's one of the features that's built into bounded rationality, and that is that we satisfy. When we find something that is a probable solution, we act on it. We don't look at other solutions. And that isn't bad, but oftentimes, since we don't look at other possible solutions, we deny ourselves a better outcome. What if I got the same truck for less money? What if I got the same base truck but with better features for the same money? Either of those is a better outcome for me. But if I satisficed, if I acted on the first solution that was presented to me, then I deny myself the opportunity of a better outcome. The other thing that they talk about, clearly the people who brought this bounded rationality model of decision making to the literature, is they recognize that every one of us has cognitive limitations. My poor little pea brain needs more bandwidth. I've had opportunities to read a lot of stuff outside of my discipline. I read a proposal from some grad students at the University of Louisville. There were 3 of them. They were chemical engineers, and they were making a presentation to their faculty. The reason I attended that is they wanted me to preview it and see if it's something that they could bring into our entrepreneurship program. Could they wrap up business around this concept? So I read a 35-page report, sort of like a business plan, sort of. Engineers did it. And then I attended an hour-long presentation, and I don't have a fucking clue. These 3 chemical engineers were talking about using recombinant DNA technology to manufacture a substitute for monosodium glutamate. They're going to use recombinant DNA technology to make an alternative for salt. I don't know recombinant DNA technology from my butt. So my point is that I have all of this high quality information in front of me, but because I have cognitive limitations, I don't understand chemical engineering, it means nothing. We all have cognitive limitations. We may see something, but we don't have the knowledge base to do anything with it. So bounded rationality simply points out that almost all of us as decision makers do not follow this perfect model of rational decision making, but rather we follow the bounded rationality model, which means that we satisfy. We take the first best option, and we all, every one of us, we all have cognitive limitations. Now, if I jump to the judgmental decision making on 245, the only thing that I want to point out there, and I'm doing this more to manage time than any other reason, we could spend a day on this alone. Many of the decisions that you and I make on a daily basis are judgmental. They're not analytic. We make them in real time. Now, when we make judgmental decisions, the first thing that's true is it's always based on our experience. So, if we have more experience in a domain, the quality of our decisions will be better. What if I'm a physician and I'm studying trauma medicine, and I'm a first-year resident? I just finished med school, and I show up and I'm working on hospital staff as a resident. I'm trying to learn that craft. So my point is, if I go in an ER and I have my first ever gunshot patient on an operating table, that's T1. That's the first time I've been with anybody in practicing trauma medicine. What if alternatively, I finished my residency, my internship, I'm board certified, and I have 7 years experience, and this is my 700th gunshot wound? Which physician has more experience? Which physician will likely make a better diagnosis and impose a better treatment modality? The guy with 700 experiences or the guy with 1? Well, of course you know the answer. So the point is that when you and I are talking about judgmental decision making, experience plays a major role. This won't surprise you. When you are 37, you're going to be a much better driver than when you were 17, because you have 20 years of experience that you didn't have when you were 17. So judgmental decision making has a huge experiential piece in it, based on our life experiences. The other thing that's true about judgmental decision making is that the people who make good judgmental decisions, because they have experiences, tend to recognize patterns. Whether they're chess players or whether they're generals or whether they're marketing experts. Doesn't matter what their discipline, doesn't matter what their domain is. If they have significant amount of experience, they'll recognize patterns and they'll say, I have an idea how we should approach that. So judgmental decision making has two big pieces. One is this experiential piece, and the other is the pattern recognition. That's what informs many of the judgmental decisions that we make. Now, the author started a discussion of ethics on page 247, and it would be fair to say that just reading it annoyed the crap out of me. These people have an agenda and they are so misinformed. First of all, you and I have already had an ethics module. I made a PowerPoint presentation to you, and I presented chapter 3 to you earlier in the summer session. But what I want to point out is the examples they use are so ill-informed. They talk about banks making subprime loans as though that's somehow evil. A subprime loan is a loan that any lender makes to anybody who's got poor credit history. Gee, imagine that. So if you're a lender and you think that if you loan to customer A, this person has a long-standing history of creditworthiness, good levels of income, solvency, or you're going to look at customer B, short-term employment, no savings, a weak credit history, you have higher risk, don't you? Higher risk of loss with customer B. So to compensate for that risk, you charge higher rates of interest. That's mainstream finance. That's mainstream risk assessment. There's nothing unethical or illegal about subprime loans, because a lot of people who are subprime borrowers wouldn't get any loan money to buy a car, home, or anything else if people didn't make that assessment and say, you pose a higher risk of loss than our prime borrowers, but we're still going to make the loan. Instead of charging you 8% interest, we're going to charge you 12. Again, I'm making that up. But my point is, they use subprime borrowers as if that's some terrible ethical lapse. And that's because these two people who wrote this book apparently don't know how the world works. And that's sad, but I'll try to compensate for that. Now, on 257, there's a good a presentation about decision-making styles. And what they do is they create a 2x2 matrix. And the two things that they consider are, what is your tolerance for ambiguity? That's one of the axes. And the other one is, what is your orientation? Do you focus on getting the task done, or do you focus on relational behaviors? Now, later in this summer session, we're going to take a quick look at leadership. We don't have a lot of time because we only have 4.5 weeks. But we're going to look at leadership, and what you will discover in that presentation is theorists, people who study leadership, have known for 60, maybe 70 years that there are two behaviors that predict effective leaders. One is, are you focused? You have skills in task. Do you know enough about a domain to organize and structure a task and then supervise it and carry it out? Do you engage in task behaviors. Do you get the job done? The other behavior, which is completely separate and distinct, would be relational behaviors. Do you authentically care about your people? Do you care about their well-being? Do you care about developing them? Do you care about challenging them, about supporting them? So effective leaders score high on task behaviors, on getting the job done, and on relational behaviors. Do I authentically care about my people? Good leaders do both well. And they're separate and distinct, because I could be good on task, I could get the job done, and have every one of you despise me and never want to work with me again. Alternatively, in the extreme, I could engage in relational behaviors. I could say, let's all sit down and hold hands and discover the inner children in ourselves and not get the job done, couldn't I? So I could be extreme on either task or relational behaviors, but effective leaders score high on task, high on relational behaviors. So my point is that they're talking about this relationship between that orientation, you have a task orientation or a relational orientation. And I agree and admit that they're separate and distinct, but if you understand leadership, you'll know that those two things combined make you a darn good leader. They make you effective if you're good at task and good at relational behaviors. So yes, they are separate constructs, but they should coexist. And I don't have any challenge with this, but I want you to understand that that's actually mainstream leadership literature. And I don't know really why it's in a chapter on decision making. I honestly don't. So, but again, the tolerance for ambiguity. Some people have a very high tolerance for ambiguity. We actually have a name for them. Yes, we call them entrepreneurs, don't we? And what about people who have a very low tolerance for ambiguity? Oh, I want to know everything about everything. That trait, that tolerance of ambiguity, every one of us has some level of that, some degree. We either tolerate it well or we don't tolerate it at all, or we're somewhere at the midpoint. Every one of us would score somewhere on tolerance of ambiguity. Some of you would score high, some of you would score low, that's okay. But it's a trait, it's a stable predisposition to behave in a particular way. And every one of us has that characteristic embedded in us. That is a trait. So my point is that their argument is that tolerance for ambiguity would sort of influence which of those decision styles they choose. And I simply want you to be aware of that. And then the next thing they take up, on 224, they start talking about decision-making biases. And I think that this is a productive discussion. A bias is some sort of a predisposition, and they can be very innocent and very benign, and they can also be pretty ugly. For example, I have a bias to buy American-made products. Given a choice, I will always buy something made in America. I will cheerfully pay twice as much to have it made in America as compared with China or other places in the world. That is called ethnocentrism. I just have, in my purchasing behaviors, I have a bias to buy American-made products. I think that's pretty healthy. You don't have to agree with me. But my point is, some biases are wholesome. Some biases are ugly. What if I thought all Asian women were introverted? What if I thought that? Is that a bias? Is that a predisposition to look at everybody and sort of categorize them as the same? If you think that's true, y'all have not met Katie Pham. She's one of our finance faculty, and that woman is outgoing on steroids, and we love her. But my point is, I'm being ridiculous. I'm in this bias, I'm essentially classifying all people who have a couple of shared characteristics, which would be sort of a national origin and a gender thing. I said Asian women, and I think every one of them, if she's an Asian woman, she's going to be introverted. She's not going to have good social skills. Well, that's stupid. But that is an example of a bias that I would describe as unhealthy. So my point is, a bias is a predisposition. I'm predisposed to buy American-made products. Happily, I don't feel stupidly about Asian women. But what the authors do is they present 9 biases that influence our decision-making. And I think it's a pretty good presentation. It starts in 224, and I will talk about briefly, maybe 5 or 6 of them. You don't need me to read the book to you, but I think 5 or 6 of these probably deserve some sort of a presentation. The first thing they talk about is what is classically called an availability bias. And availability bias says, is this event recent or not? I don't remember this, but I understand the Spanish flu was prevalent in this country in 1918, and a lot of people died. Okay, so that's not a recent event. How about the coronavirus? Hello, 2020, maybe March of 2020, 3 months ago. Now, that's not going to influence my thinking, but I'm just using that as an example of recency. I have no history, no recall, no awareness really of Spanish flu except to read about it. The coronavirus, we have all lived through the impact on our lives and our society. So that would have us an availability bias. And the argument that they're making is if we make decisions, we might rely on an event that is more recent than something in the past. So that's what an availability bias is. They talk about another type of bias called representativeness. And I get it that that's a big compound long word, but what we do is we generalize from a single event or from a very, very small sample and think, well, that is representative of everything. I would use school shootings as a sad example of a representativeness bias. Every single time some psychopath goes into school and shoots students, there is this nationwide outpouring. We have to ban gun owners are evil. Wrong. I'm a lifelong gun owner. When a psychopath does something evil, we need to lay the blame at that person's feet. We don't need to lay the blame at the feet of an innocent, law-abiding citizen. That would be me. But yet, that's what happens. Somebody walks into school, shoots some kids, terrible, tragic, I get it. But the point is we take that single event and we say, okay, let's strip away all the guns from the 100 million law-abiding gun owners that own them because some crazy person is evil. That is fundamentally wrong. But that's a good example of a representativeness bias. A third one that I'd like to talk about is sunk cost. That's something that accountants understand well. And a sunk cost says that, gosh, you've already invested this much money in something, whatever that is, new product, new market rollout, whatever the case may be. We should probably make a decision based on that. Gosh, we've already spent $500,000, let's spend some more. Okay. Or people may say the alternative, but the sunk cost bias influences their decision. We've invested this, time to stop. So sunk cost deals with how much we, in any capacity, have invested in a particular endeavor. And that influences our thinking, sometimes to continue, sometimes to cut and call it. Overconfidence, gosh, imagine that. I think that the overconfidence bias is operative almost any time any company buys another company that's struggling. Happens a lot. Let's assume company A is healthy, got a lot of money, a lot of organizational slack, and company B is in the same industry and it's got some really nice features, but for whatever reasons they're struggling. So the management of company A, if indeed their decision making is influenced by the overconfidence bias, would say, we got this, we're experts. We can go in there, do some razzle-dazzle stuff, turn it around and make $1 jillion, or maybe 10 jillion. Okay. Why would you think you can immerse yourself in another company and do a better job running that other company than the people there are? Why would you think that? Because you're overconfident. A lot of people think that they have some special gift. But again, you can see how the overconfidence bias would influence decisions. I am Superman, I can do this. Wrong. Framing bias. Wow. How do you frame a problem? Or anything, for example. I credit the text because they used a fun example. They were talking about ground beef. They said that grocers sell ground beef, and what they do is they represent the percentage of lean meat. They say ground chuck, and I think this is true, ground chuck is 85% lean. Ground round is 93% lean. So we want to hear the positive stuff. We don't want to hear that ground chuck is 15% fat, or that ground round is 7% fat. We want to accentuate the positive. So what we're doing is we're framing. Now, you come to me, and what if you say, boss, if I'm your boss, you say, boss, we're really kind of struggling in the southeastern market or the Midwest or who knows where, and we don't know why. And I say something that's stupid and quick and uninformed, and I say, well, gosh, all we have to do is cut the price. Okay, what if we are putting in that market, wherever it is, a product that lacks features that our competitors offer? What if our product is failing? You see my point? I'm attributing degraded sales, a low level of sales, to simply a price point at which we're selling this stuff. Not to the fact that we're selling junk, stuff that doesn't perform well or that requires a great deal of after the sale service. So what I'm doing is I'm framing the problem wrong. That would describe, and this is not a criticism, but so many people and so many professions have the potential to make a bad diagnosis. What if I took my truck to a dealership and I said, it's not starting well, or whatever I say, and the dealer guy say, okay, let's replace all the spark plugs and ignition coils. And they give me a $500 bill for a repair, and I leave the dealership, and that didn't solve the problem. It's not running well. Well, they misdiagnosed the problem. What if I go to a physician and I complain about some ailment, and that physician misdiagnoses whatever's troubling me? That physician is going to prescribe some treatment modality that doesn't match up with my need. So this thing about framing essentially says, how do you frame the challenge that's in front of you? Because if you frame it poorly, everything you do after that will be a maladaptive solution. And then the last one I want to talk about is so common. I had a friend when I was at USC that did his dissertation, Jody Thompson, did his dissertation in escalation of commitment. And that's a phenomenon that's well understood in the domain of strategy. What some companies will do is they'll invest in a particular endeavor, and it doesn't go as they anticipate, and they ramp it up. They invest more people, time, resources, whatever the case may be. I think, and I'm looking at this as an outsider, I think that the F-35, the Joint Strike Fighter, that's now been adopted by the Marines and the Air Force and the Navy, that's why it's a Joint Strike Fighter, I think that that's a classic example of escalation of commitment. It is decades behind operational readiness. It is fraught with problems. It's gone so far over budget that it's almost incalculable. A single unit costs about $1.2 million. A single seat fighter aircraft will cost $1.2. If we give an infantryman a $1,000 rifle and a pair of crappy boots, and we give the Air Force enough money to buy hundreds of multi-million-dollar aircraft that aren't operational and are over budget and are 10 years late getting into service. So the point is that the defense contractor, I'm not even sure who it is now actually, has just continually persuaded the Pentagon that they're going to make things better. And the Pentagon keeps throwing money at it. So we now have an aircraft that's 10 or 15 years late to service. The units that are out are not operational ready. There are all sorts of problems. I understand that the helmet for the pilot costs $400,000, that they have problems like the oxygen system not working. Gee, that's kind of scary if you're a pilot. But yet, we have this escalation of commitment. The Pentagon keeps throwing billions of dollars into this F-35 program. I don't understand it. I give our guys better rifles, but that's me. So again, these are just examples of decision-making biases. And I'm on 266 now, and I want to talk about something that's somewhat common when groups make decisions. The authors talk about a construct called groupthink. I'm trying to remember. There was an author, a very bright man named Janus, who wrote a book, and it might have been 1973, and it was entitled Groupthink. And what Janus did is he studied a number of very, very high-profile failures that sort of were manifested by groupthink. And here's what groupthink is. And I'll use one example maybe, and we can work with that. First of all, cohesion is something that we exhibit in a group context. And if I'm in a cohesive group, that means that all of us in that group, if indeed it is a cohesive group, the membership in that group values so much to us that we will subordinate self. We'll put the group's needs ahead of our own. We'll make sacrifices. That's what cohesion is. Membership in a group is sufficiently important to you that you will subordinate your own self-interest to be a member of that group and to contribute to that group. And one of the examples that Janice used in that book written, I think in 1973, called Groupthink, was he was studying Jack Kennedy's cabinet. Kennedy was president from 1961 to 1963. And Kennedy was almost singularly responsible for the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba, which was a disaster on every possible dimension. And his cabinet, again, I'm relying on memory, his cabinet was made up of 12 men. I think they were all men at that time. And every single one of them wrote memoirs after Jack Kennedy's death. And to a man, every single person said, I so valued being a member of Jack Kennedy's cabinet that I did not speak up. I was willing to subordinate what I thought was good judgment because I didn't want to be that guy. I wanted to be part of the group. I wanted to be well regarded. I wanted to stay as a member of his cabinet, so I didn't speak up. And what happened is the members of Kennedy's cabinet, I guess implicitly, permitted him to go forward and carry out this Bay of Pigs invasion, which was terrible on every dimension. And again, cohesiveness is good, groupthink is bad, because if groupthink is operative, what that means is that we're not thinking critically. Here's a classic example of critical thinking in group decision making. There's a technique called devil's advocacy. And I want you to think about this. There are other approaches as well, but this is powerful and simple. You're in a group, 5, 6 people, 8 people, 12, whatever it is, and y'all got to do something in an organization. The team lead in that group should say something like, Norton, will you take on the role of a devil's advocate for this project? And Norton would say, heck yes. So the role of a devil's advocate is to listen what other people are proposing and simply criticize it in ways that suggest that this is cognitive conflict, not social conflict. I don't say, you're ugly and your mother dresses you funny. I don't say that. I say, I think that's wrong and here's why. A devil's advocate's only responsibility is to point out the flawed assumptions, the shortcomings, whatever the case may be. But you see my point? If you appoint somebody as a devil's advocate, if you're making some sort of a group decision, it's the job of the person who takes on that role to be cognitively critical. I don't think we should do that because. And what the devil's advocate doesn't have to do is she or he doesn't have to propose a new solution. She or he simply says, I think that's wrong for these reasons. So, a devil's advocate builds in critical thinking. Important stuff does not go undiscussed, unnoticed, untouched, because that's the job of the devil's advocate. So all I'm saying to you is cohesion is wonderful. I would want to be a member of a cohesive group. But if cohesion exists in an extreme form, it can devolve into groupthink, where we don't think critically, we don't speak up, because we really want to stay as a member of this group that we value. And we're not going to be critical thinkers or speakers. And that's where the simplicity and the power of a devil's advocate. My oldest daughter, Jennifer, came to me, gosh, I bet you this was 18, 20 years ago. And she said, Dad, I want to buy a Mazda Miata. And of course, she knew that I had to help her both with the down payment and as a loan guarantor. And I said, honey, I'm willing to be supportive of that, but I want you to know that it's a very poor choice as a daily driver. I like Mazda Miatas, but they're tiny. They're not as big as a Minute. All you can put in a Mazda Miata would be 2 size 6 women, 1 CD, and 2 peanut M&Ms. You don't have room for your dog, for luggage, for a rifle case. It can't go off-road, it can't haul, it can't tow. You can't do anything but be cute on a sunny day. And I probably didn't use those words, but my point is, I was acting as a devil's advocate. I said, if that is your decision, I'll be supportive of it, I'll help. but I think it's a poor choice, and here's why. It has incredibly limited capabilities. It is not a good choice as a daily driver. If you could afford 2 cars, a daily driver that was functional and a fun car, hallelujah. But all I'm saying to you is that wasn't a formal role. That was a dad interacting with a young adult daughter and telling her why I didn't think the Miata was a good choice. So, I'm done. I'm also exhausted. I think I filmed 3 of these today, but you know that because I'm wearing the same pink shirt. I think I filmed 3 sessions today. So now, drum roll, we have the attendance verification question. What type of car did I drive when I was racing? That's it. We're done. Love you. Since it's a Friday, technically, y'all have a great weekend. I'll see you soon.